One Piece chapter 1084 has been another incredible chapter in a long line of chapters that don't even include our central cast, that has also sparked a ton of conversation among the community. And one thing I wanted to center in on today's video would be my speculation and conversation, just my stream of thoughts around the mention of the letter written by Queen Lili that has been passed down through the Nefetari family for years, and just share my general thoughts on that. Specifically, the scene between Cobra and the Gorse has sparked a multitude of speculations from the community, most of which seem to be centering around the idea of Im being Lili, which I don't think is... It's not personally my favorite idea or theory, but I do understand why the speculation leads to that, because we really just don't know that much about Im at all. So anytime there's a kind of mysterious and powerful or impactful figure introduced, people like to seem to gravitate towards associating them with being Im. So for a long time it was Rox is probably Im. He reached his goal of becoming king of the world. And now that Lili is a newly introduced character from the Void Century, making her a pretty exclusive list character, people are kind of leaning towards the idea of her and Im being the same person. But I'm actually a bit more interested in the thoughts around this supposed letter that Cobra mentioned in his discussion. This letter that has been passed down from Lili, from the Void Century, through the Nefetari family for hundreds and hundreds of years to this point. And I wanted to examine it from a bit of both sides, because I think it is important to take into account that if Lili were Im, that it would drastically change the contents of the letter. So I wanted to look at it from the angle of, first, if Lili were to become Im, what the letter might be about, and second, about if Lili were a separate character. So first off, I don't really like the concept of Lili being Im specifically because of what it means for this letter. It seems like Cobra mentioning that during this discussion would kind of lend towards it being viewed as this really important sort of information and tool into the story that Oda's dropping here for revealing what could be a ton of secrets about some long-lasting questions we've had in the series. But her being Im would kind of limit what I think she would actually be able to say in this letter in order for her to actually kind of move into that dark ruler position where nobody knows of her existence. So if Lili were to become Im, I think it is likely that she would send this letter to her brother, first off letting her know that, hey, I'm going to stay in Mary Joie, I'm going to lead this newly founded world, and you have to take over ruling Alabasta. However, I think it could also be some sort of explanation or foreboding about what the transition of wiping of history and all these new leaders in different countries is going to be like, since the Nefetari are the only ones going to stay, since they had Im, who kind of does stay, I guess, if it were Lili becoming Im to become the leader of all of this, and then her brother stays back, and I guess she might have a soft spot for her brother or something, or just some sort of unspoken contract between the Nefetari family and Im that they're just not going to bring this up, I guess. That's why I feel like it kind of limits where it could go, is that if this were the case, I think Lili really wouldn't be able to say that much in order to really keep her identity and her goal and what she's trying to become an attainable thing. Otherwise, it could just spread everywhere. I think it seems far more likely that Lili was probably a separate character who defied Im and wrote this letter to her brother as a warning of sorts that she's probably going to die. She was going to go into this meeting that with all these other monarchs pledging their allegiance, and she probably knew she was going to die. And this would also kind of call back to what we see with Cobra in this last chapter. He seemed to be going into this meeting with the Gorse kind of knowing he wasn't going to come out of it. I mean, you going into a meeting with the 5 most powerful people in the world, and you're going to bring up one of the most taboo topics that exists in the world that's going to be very divisive, and you really don't have any allies around you. So he went into this kind of for his own selfish purposes, not knowing he wasn't going to probably come out of it. And it's possible that Lili did this very similar thing. She sent her letter to her brother, and it's possible that Cobra gave this letter to Vivi going into this meeting, or he gave it to Shaka and Pel to give to Vivi. But it most definitely involves something related to the will of D, as he felt it was important enough to mention that she had given this letter to them, while right after asking what the meaning of D was to their face, like as direct as you can possibly be. So I've taken some time to consider a few possibilities of what the exact contents of this letter may be, but I want to take a look at what we know for sure so far. So we can first off say for sure that the author of this letter was Queen Lili. It was directly stated by Cobra in the chapter. I think it is also fair to say that the contents of this letter were so relevant to the mission of being Alabasta's leader that this one letter has been passed down from the Void Century as a relic of sorts to every single leader of Alabasta down 800 years, to where Cobra and Vivi are now. So I don't think that's an unfair assumption. But I also think it is likely that this letter probably mentions that there's some sort of mission directly that these Alabasta leaders, whether it be the Nefetari family only themselves or just anyone who's leading the country, they have a very important mission to support those with the will of D, or support whatever Vivi has to do in the final story. Because I think it is most definitely going to tie directly into what her final purpose is going to be. It would also kind of explain, if she's the one in control of this letter and she read it realizing what her new purpose is going to be, that she has the sudden shift. We had Morgan's mention that she was some sort of crying mess, which makes sense after your dad just dies. A little cruel on his end. But when we see her in her most recent appearance, she's back to the composed, well-collected, like, it's hard to say for me to say for well-collected because I literally just watched Alabasta, and during half the arc in the war, she's just screaming all the time, but she's usually pretty collected and calm and put together as a leader. And that's where we see her again, as she's on the flying teapot with Morgans and Wapol in her most recent appearance. It would kind of be reminiscent of when we saw Momo have his dramatic shift back during the raid after reading Odin's logbook, where he went from this crying mess where people were just trying to protect him and almost sacrificing themselves over and over for him, only for him to be this crying mess until he reads the logbook given to him by Yamato, and suddenly he has this new purpose. He knows he has to live. And that would make sense for Vivi as well. It is likely that there is some mention regarding the importance or necessity of those with the will of D, as, like I said earlier, Cobra is going into this with the full realization of the weight of the question he's asking, but he felt important enough to bring this up and add more pressure onto them. And he was it seems like he was asking, either being fully aware of what the meaning is to just kind of test their honesty and quiet his own suspicions as to how honest the world government in Gorse may be. Or it may be that after his experience with Luffy, he wanted to know the full extent of the truth, with this likely being maybe his last opportunity to talk to them about it, because you can kind of see he's deteriorating very quickly in the story after that whole revolution. But in my personal opinion, I believe this letter probably mentions a few major truths about the One Piece universe. Some of these questions that we've been waiting for such a long time, like, you can trace the question about the meaning of the will of D all the way back to Drum Kingdom, where Kureha corrects Dalton about the correct pronunciation of Roger's name. That has been lingering all the way back from then, with not much further context until hundreds of chapters later, decades of time later, and we finally get to know some of these, and that could half those questions and maybe even answered in this letter being read. But I don't personally believe that one of those truths was that there's this secret leader of Eam for the whole planet, just kind of based on Cobra's reaction. And I could be totally wrong. This could be just him in response for a total shock of somebody sitting on the empty throne, kind of like doing something you never figured would happen in your entire life, something you hold true being shattered like that. That would make sense too, but I do think he would have a bit more of a dulled reaction if he knew that there was a leader like this mentioned in the letter. Instead, I think it was more something along the lines of Lili warning her brother that the future rulers of Alabasta and the other 19 monarchs were asked to give up their freedom by Eam in exchange for as much power and wealth, and not really questioning their moral desires for themselves and everyone that came after them, which obviously translated into the Celestial Dragons. But this was a request that Lili was likely planning to turn down, something that she knew was probably going to get her killed, but she didn't really want to give up her freedom as a ruler, I guess, or just freedom in general, as that's kind of a huge thing with those with the D initial. And I actually wrote down here that I wanted to kind of mention something I had seen mentioned about Eam and the whole design for Pangea Castle. It's based on, and please forgive my pronunciation of this, the Chateau de Chambord, which was a giant palace that the finishing touches were done by King Louis XIV during his reign. And a huge part of the way he used his palace was he would invite different royals, like lords or barons, just people who had power over their own land. And he would invite them to stay with him in kind of an effort to not let them rule completely free however they wanted, by giving them this invitation to come live within his lavish walls, kind of like what you see with the Celestial Dragons leaving their own countries. I just thought that was something that was really interesting, that it kind of tied back into the own historical use during his reign, as that's something Oda does all the time, but I thought that would be a huge kind of connection between the way that the world government was founded and these own political practices that were used. I thought was interesting. Getting back to what I was saying, I think Lili likely told her brother that he would obviously need to take over immediately as Alabasta needed a leader, but he would also probably need to throw his full support behind supporting the clan of D. This is the same group that the Ancient Kingdom in the war was likely supported by, maybe even led by, that was on the complete opposite side of the world government. So reading this letter, he might even see this as like a group that's already been demonized by his side of the war, and you still see them still demonized, called the enemies of God. But this is coming directly from his sister, the queen of their country, and maybe she even reveals the truth of what those with the D initials are, and like they're the ones who fight for true freedom, or dreams with D, or the dawn, or something like that. But they would be the only ones possibly able to save the world from this literal chokehold that 19 other monarchs and this secret leader are creating by abdicating their own freedom. So, regardless, the contents of this letter written by Lili Nefetari were so convincing that they convinced her entire kingdom and bloodline that followed her all the way to Vivi to provide support to the Ancient Kingdom. We know for sure that they had to have been some kind of ally, or at least mediator with the two, because they have one manga confirmed poneglyph which mentions incredible information about the location of an ancient weapon, and another anime-only poneglyph with Luffy, Zoro, and Chopper exploring the desert, and Zoro falls through this like cracked dome. We don't have any idea what that says to my knowledge, but it was also back during early Alabasta when Luffy would swear more often and say that Zoro fell on his ass to get through the hole. So I just thought it was an interesting mention here. But perhaps Lili was in support of the revolution against the Ancient Kingdom initially, because it's not wild to think that you see one kingdom with, as we've seen, all this technology and power, and not be a bit intimidated. So they may have just amassed trying to fight against that. And then after witnessing what the Ancient Kingdom might have represented, or just seeing what devastation they were doing to that, and then being asked to forfeit her freedom, she just kind of said, nah, and I'm gonna go not ally with Eam. Instead, I'm gonna make it my goal to work to stop and pass on the information of how to stop this allegiance and group that's being gathered around him in this empty throne. But I wrote down here something that I think it's like a rough draft of what I think she may have written, and I could be totally off with all this, but I thought it would be interesting to hear it out. So I wrote, "The world is set to be ruled by those who do not value their own freedom. I will be unable to return home, but it is your duty and all of those who share our Nefetari name in the future to do whatever it takes to support those with the D initial. They are the ones destined to take this world into an era of freedom. The day will eventually come when they will create what us 20 monarchs failed to do here. Now, I'm not Oda, but I think something like that would inspire generations of people to support this really uncommon group, as there's not a ton of them we see today, but they're still super impactful, and every time we see them in the story. So you get direct word from your queen, and this inherited will from a family that's ruled this country for hundreds of years, all the way back to at least the Void Century. That's a huge lead into what could be Vivi's final purpose in the story. I know some people don't like Vivi, I know a lot of people do like Vivi, but some people have wanted her to come back and rejoin the story, and this would be a very logical way to bring her back in and also keep a ton of intrigue around her as she holds the truths to some of these long questions. We've had these questions for so long, and if she were the one to reveal that, she would gain so much more popularity among the fan base especially too. But I think that's all the speculation I was going to do for today. I have a bit of a longer video. I wanted to try something a bit different and just do a bit more casual conversation. So let me know what you guys think. I appreciate everybody for listening, and make sure to leave your comments down below regarding maybe your own theories, anything I might have missed, or anything you think I was just way off on. Feel free to leave a comment down below, but make sure you subscribe for more content like this in the future, and I will see you guys all next time.